Well, guys, there are a lot of new faces around here in my community on YouTube, on Spotify, Apple, Instagram, LinkedIn, and I'm so grateful for all of you, for everyone who's been a part of the journey. But I thought it was time to do a little reintroduction to myself. It has been about a year and a half since I started the podcast. So the last time I did this was September of 2024, and a lot has changed since then. So I wanted to take this time for you guys to learn a little bit more about me again and hear my story and tell you about why I'm at where I'm at today. So I'm going to keep this as short as possible, but I also just to add to that, I just also got back from spending a month in Vietnam, and I haven't been there since I was 12 or 13, so it's been, 14, 15 years since I went back home, and I got to see a lot of family that I haven't seen since then. So that there's a deep sense of just understanding a little bit more about my foundation and heritage that I'm sitting with right now. So I thought it was a great time to do this. Welcome back to another episode of the Higher Alignment Podcast, where high performers come to grow without stress, shame, or burning out. I'm Mintu Lam, and I'm here to help you work smarter, live fuller, and feel like yourself again. If you're tired of running on empty, book your complimentary assessment call at higheralignmentconsulting.com/program, and let's figure out what's draining your energy and what you can do to start feeling happy and peaceful once again. You can find the link in the show notes. Now let's get into the episode. You might be wondering how I got here. And that means how I got to this point of coaching people and working with high performers and executives who are dealing with burnout. And so obviously I burnt out in my last career, but as I go through this work, it is so beyond what's happening in the moment, right? Like if you have the patterns that lead to burnout, which is a big part of it, it's not just the job, it's not just the situation, it's also deeply ingrained patterns as to why you're burning out. Those start from childhood. Inner child work is a big part of what I do, and understanding our attachment styles and nervous system imprints. And again, this all starts from when we were kids. So let's start there. So I am born and raised in Wainwright, Alberta. For anyone who's from Alberta, Canada, you may have heard of it. Small town of 5,000, 6,000 people, I think. Now, still might be a little bit more since I've left. But my parents were sponsored there by a Catholic church. We were not Catholic, but they were at that time, this was 1979, they were looking for a refugee family to sponsor. So my parents did immigrate here. Legally, I will add, because apparently this day and age, that's important to note, but they were legal immigrants. And they came here in 1979 with my oldest brother, Trung. And they came from Vietnam. A little bit backstory there is my parents both grew up in a small town, small city in southern Vietnam. My mom's family was, quite poor and had to work really to make ends meet. And my dad's family actually ended up being one of the richest people in the province. However, they were self-made, so they were also very poor. And what's interesting is on my dad's side, my grandma could not read or write, but she had an amazing business sense. And so she would essentially kind of just instruct my grandpa what to do with their farms, which is how they made money. And then they eventually expand into other businesses. I kind of come from a lineage of business-minded women. And so she couldn't read or write. So she kind of just told my grandpa what to do, and they built up this family that they had and these businesses, which was great. And then my mom's side, she didn't know her dad, but my grandma was a devout Buddhist and was kind of known as the Mother Teresa in her area. So any poor people who didn't have clothes to be buried in or food or couldn't pay for their medical bills, they would come to my grandma and she would help the people, that needed it. And, up until she passed just last year, my mom and uncle would send money home to her to be able to facilitate this for people. And again, very hardworking, resilient, found a way to make ends meet. And my mom, inherited a lot of those qualities, and so did I. So that was kind of like the foundations of my parents. And eventually they met in school, and it was sweet. My mom actually told me the other day that, you know, when my dad had he had asked her, I don't know if he was asked to be his girlfriend or when he proposed to her, he actually did it in a letter because he was too shy to ask her in person. I didn't know this, which would kind of make sense when you know my dad. He passed in 2024. Um, but so they met and they fell in love and they had a family and they had my oldest brother in Vietnam. And then he was born in 1977, and I believe the war ended around that time, so right before he was born. But then, obviously, after the war ended, the country was heavily communist, still is. I don't know the degree to kind of which it is now, but I can tell you there's a lot of red and yellow flags everywhere. Like, the Vietnam flag is red and yellow, but yeah. Anyways, I'm digressing. You can just kind of see the communists definitely made sure their mark was left all over Vietnam. So, anyways, um, after my brother was born, my dad's parents, during the reign of the communists, they had taken a lot from them, a lot of their land, a lot of their property. And so my grandma on my dad's side was a very big proponent of encouraging my parents to leave the country. And I think they was offered to all my aunts and uncles on that side, and no one wanted to go except him and my mom. So the first time they tried to escape the country, obviously they're paying people off, so my grandparents did that for them, and they were essentially blackmailed. My grandparents paid the fee, the gold, and then they purposely caught them and they threw my parents and my brother in jail. And so my dad was in jail with his nephew and my mom's brother because they all tried to escape together. They were in jail for about a year, and my mom and brother and my aunts were in jail for, I think, just under 6 months, about that, 3 to 6 months. I can't remember the exact timeline, which is pretty wild, to say that your parents were in jail just for trying to have freedom. And so, I remember my mom telling me this story because my oldest brother was about 2 at that time. And the men and women were separated. They had 2 different jails. And jail meaning they were just confined to one empty box space, right? They're pretty much all cooped up in one area. They're given very, poor food, probably rice. And I think my mom said they used to get a little can of sardines kind of thing. But I remember she would tell me this story that the guards were really nice. And so they would take my brother, who was 2 at the time, over to the men's prison to visit my dad. And sometimes my dad wouldn't even know that my brother was there until he got past him because, at that time, people are obviously sad, having a hard time. And so this baby's kind of bringing enjoyment to everyone. So, the men would play with my brother and all these things. And then also my dad would look and he'd find my brother there and he wouldn't even know. And so it was actually really sweet that, he could I don't know. I love babies. I think kids are such a blessing. And so it is a memory that she shared that was really fond for them. And then after that, they came back and then they paid to escape again. And the second time they made it out and they escaped on a boat to Malaysia, I believe it was. So if you ever heard the term boat people, my parents were boat people. And, that was scary for them too. There were pirates, which aren't the Johnny Depp kind pirates, but, fishermen who were robbers who hijacked the boat. They stole all their things. They, unfortunately, I believe my mom said one woman on the boat, they did not great things to her, terrible things to her. I shouldn't downplay that. Um, it was a really scary time. They took everything they had. But again, another fond story she shares is how my brother was wearing this little red ball cap, and they had these 2 little diamonds. And so what my mom did was she actually just cut a hole in the lining of that hat and put those diamonds in there and put it on my brother's head. And the pirates never found it. And so my mom still has that hat and those diamonds to this day. They made it on that trek over. And she also tells a story about how my brother, the pirates would obviously like push the people around and bully them around, but for some reason he kind of thought it was a game. So he laughed and kind of giggled throughout the situation, which she said she was really grateful for because if he would have been upset, I think it would have been a lot harder to deal with. So after that, they make it to Malaysia. They live on a refugee camp. for a few months, and then eventually they get sponsored to Canada. And again, it was a Catholic church in Wainwright that sponsored them. And actually, when we were just in Vietnam the other day, my mom was telling me about how my dad had already proposed to her, but he actually ended up making her an engagement ring out of a coconut shell on the island. Um, and then eventually when they got to Canada, he got her a real one, but I didn't know that, and I thought it was really sweet that he did that. So, my parents immigrate to Canada in 1979, and they set up in Wainwright. They come over in November, and it's freezing cold. So going from, 30, 35-degree weather in Vietnam to winter in Canada is no joke. But, I tell that story because it's important, because it shows where my survival and resilience came from. And it also, I think, puts into perspective when we're having hard days and going through hard things, like what hard really is. Like I remember when the show Survivor came out and my mom was watching all the things these people do. My mom's like, "Oh, I did all that in the refugee camp." Like it was like no big deal, making bamboo huts out of bamboo leaves and starting fires and catching fish. Like these are things my mom had to do to survive. So I think that's just so important to tell, because again, it puts into perspective what the hard things are that we go through in first world countries. And I know it's also just healing for me to retell that story. So that's a little bit about my foundation, my family. And going back to Vietnam this last month just reminded me a lot of that stuff. I went to my grandparents', old farmhouse. I got to meet a lot of my family and just to see what they create, but also see how people live over there. Like, my family is doing well for, you know, they're doing well for themselves. Um, but it's still a third world country. It's still very different. And there's something beautiful about that, because I think they find beauty in a lot of simplicity compared to the large amount of consumption we do here in North America. Um, but also, again, it puts into perspective what's really important. All right, guys, quick pause. If this episode is hitting home, I created a free burnout quiz that takes less than 2 minutes. It helps you pinpoint exactly how burnout shows up for you and what shifts you can take to start feeling happier, calmer, and more in control. Most executives tell me the results feel eerily accurate, so head over to the link in the show notes and you can take the quiz there. The story continues. My parents set up shop in Wainwright, a small town, and me and my other brother Hugh are now born there. Came a few years after, and then I came a few years after that. I'm the youngest of the three. And again, I would say we grew up in really humble beginnings. My parents worked hard. My dad owned a gas station. My mom was a seamstress and a tailor, and they just raised us to be good, honest kids, and hard work was first and foremost. You know what I mean? Getting good grades in school, whatever we did, performing well at it, whether it was playing hockey for my brother or getting good grades or dancing or whatever. I was a competitive swimmer. I was a competitive dancer. And I was naturally competitive, but also it was just kind of like, if we're going to invest money into this, like commit and devote and show us your dedication. And, when I look at my hard work as an adult, I look back at those years of not only how my parents raised us, but put us in situations where we had to devote ourselves, and like, quitting wasn't really an option, and not in a way where it's like we were held against our will. It's not that, but like, figure it out. Figure it out, problem solve, like make it work, And I was a competitive dancer I started dance when I was 8. I probably got competitive when I was like 12, and then that carried out into my 20s. But being a competitive dancer taught me so many incredible life skills. It taught me about hard work and taking ownership for my part in all of it. I trained in ballet, jazz, tap, lyrical, contemporary. I was never the most flexible. I had to work really hard for my flexibility. So I'd have to show up to class 30 minutes before just to be able to
perform the best in my class and get the most out of it because it took my body that long to warm up into my flexibility. Um, so it taught me hard work, it taught me resilience, it taught me teamwork, it taught me accountability and showing up. And, I don't have kids yet, but I hope that I have a daughter and I hope she loves dance because I think there's so many powerful lessons in that. And I mean, you can probably get that in any type of team sport. But that was a big part of my childhood. When I was going to school, I would come home and I'd be at the studio 4 to 5 days a week for 2 to 3 hours every day, and it was competition, it was repetition, it was practice, it was all these things. And so um, that was the majority of my childhood was school and dance. Again, I played the piano for a little bit as every Asian kid has to. Although I don't think my brothers ever had to, but maybe because I was the only girl that was like, and I was the last one, my mom's like, one of you's learning how to play the piano. So I played it probably till I was 10. And then I think she could just tell my heart wasn't in it. So, and my focus switched to dance. So I was putting my time and effort in still a healthy lane. Um, and again, I was a competitive swimmer for a few years as well too, which was also great. Great way to burn energy, great exercise, great commitment. It's cool because my niece now is a competitive swimmer. So I was originally hoping she went to the dance route or went the dance right. Now she's a swimmer, which is like equally cool for me too. But it was just again hard work and performance was a big part of my childhood. And as I grew up, I graduated, I went to university. And when I graduated, I was going to go into the sciences. I had like a 98% coming out of high school in like chemistry. And for some reason, I thought that all of a sudden made me like super smart in the sciences. And then I got to university and realized that I was competing with all these kids who want to be doctors and optometrists and pharmacists, and realized I was way out of my lane. And so I studied sciences for a couple of years and then I switched into business and found more of my groove. But one of the tough parts for me was I didn't like school. I would consider myself a smart person, but I did not like school. I didn't like the structure of it. I didn't like the testing. Like, I don't know what it was, but I didn't. And so I did okay in school. And then I got to my last semester and I didn't want to finish. And I wanted to work instead. And I remember that being a very hard conversation with my parents, like, especially if you come from an Asian household or a household that really values education, that was not an easy conversation to have with my parents. I had it with my mom. I didn't have it with my dad because he ended up being the one who was more disappointed. And I know it was something she had to smooth over on behalf of me with him for a long time. But I just didn't resonate with school. I didn't, and I felt like I was going there against my will every day, even though I know no one had a gun to the back of my head, but I just didn't like it, and that showed up in how I showed up, in how I studied, and how I performed. And so, when I didn't finish, it now pretty much became a mission to prove to my parents that I wasn't a failure. And so I kinda bounced around from job to job and, you know, I can save all the notes on that, but I eventually ended up working for Mercedes-Benz. I worked for a dealership in town here, and it was because a friend of mine's ex-boyfriend was a sales manager there, and he just asked, he's like, "Hey, do you wanna try selling cars?" And I was like, "Sure," like, what I got to lose? Like, I'd never been in a sales position before, never knew anything about the car industry, but I was kinda like, "I know what I'm doing." Like, I had been account executive assistants, I had worked for financial planners, and I was always a high performer at what I did, but they were all support staff, roles, which is fine, but I was growing a little tiresome of that. I wanted to use more of myself and apply myself more, so I said, "Why not? Let's try this car sales thing." And cool to work for Mercedes-Benz, right? Also not car girl at all. Um So I started working there, and that ended up being a 9-year-long career, and I climbed up through the ranks, and within a few years, I think I was about 3 years in total, I ended up in a financial management position with them, and, I stayed there till I left in 2023, and it still to this day was a great career for me. Like, if you know anything about the car industry, it's pretty, unruly. It will chew you up, it will spit you out, it will ask everything of you. It is fast, there's lots of turnover because there's no, um, like, no certifications or qualifications to really get into the industry. It's filled with all types of characters, and I'm really blessed that I had a really unique story where I went into luxury sales right away, and I only worked one place. Like, if anyone knows anyone who worked in the auto industry, you bounce around, that's pretty normal. I worked at one place, which was the crème de la crème, and I had a great career because of it. I was there for 9 years. But, this was where I grew up. I think I started working there at 25. Yeah, about 25 because I left there around 34. Yes, 25, 25, 26. And so it was some of my most formidable years as an adult and as, again, a high performer. I learned, again, sales. I learned how I was there. I used to work 12 hours a day, hitting targets, meeting certain expectations, working with high-end clientele, all these things. And it taught me so much about the business world and how to work with people and just how to it honestly showed me what I was capable of, if I'm being honest with you. It showed me at the highest level what I was capable of, and it gave me a lot of confidence when it comes to performance. Now, on the other side of that, though, is that's also where I burnt out. And honestly, probably not for the first time. I think that's just the first time I could figure out that something was wrong with me because I've been used to running on performance and survival mode for years. Yeah, like I think everyone in your 20s kind of does that, right? Because you just don't know any better, and you're staying up late, getting up early, all these things. But as I was working there, I started to really understand that what gets you to point A won't necessarily get you to point B, and sometimes the strategy needs a change in how you find success. And so what do I mean by that? My career was everything to me. And on the backside of it, I was trying to find a relationship. I was, dating a little bit here and there, but nothing ever serious or nothing ever really like worthwhile, if I'm being honest. And I was finding myself in relationships that did not value who I was as a person, but also because I wasn't valuing myself as a person. You know, I would give everything to my job, but in that process, I would constantly self abandon. And I came to this conclusion when I remember very distinctly waking up one morning and going, "Is this it? Is this it?" I was making multiple six figures before I was 30 years old. I had a brand new Mercedes-Benz every year as perks of the job, okay? Brand new Benz every year. I had an incredible closet, okay? Luckily, most of that stuff still fits me, so I had an incredible closet. I had I didn't really have time freedom in the sense that I had to work a lot, but when I wanted to, or when I could pick up for a weekend and go away, I could kinda travel how I wanted to travel. I from the outside looking in, had it made, as far as a young woman in business. Like, I was doing really well. But inside, I was exhausted. I was irritable. I, again, wasn't attracting quality relationships. My girlfriends were great. My family was great. But as far as like intimate relationships, not attracting quality people or men, I was so high strung, so neurotic, had to be busy all the time. At one point, I completely stopped dancing, which dance has been a love of mine since I was a little girl. So I stopped dancing for years. Um, I just had completely lost connection with myself. And so when I woke up that morning and said, "Is this it?" I felt like I was lost. I felt lost because I had done everything everyone had told me to be successful, yet I still felt empty inside. So it's like, how does that make any sense? I did the things. I got the good job. I got the house. I got more than one condo. I got cars. I got all these things that everyone says are going to make you happy, but like I don't feel happy. And then you feel guilty for even saying that out loud because it's like from the outside looking in, you have everything anyone could ever want. So who are you to say you don't feel happy? And then you guilt and shame yourself on top of that. And that's exhausting. So it was a really confusing time in my life. And for me, on top of all those things that I just said, I was irritable, I was short tempered, I was neurotic, I was puking about once a week from stress. And I thought it was dietary issues. I thought I was allergic to things. I tried different diets. Nothing fixed it. Only once I healed my burnout did the throwing up stop. So I couldn't digest food properly. Um, and the other part of that was I was constantly like everything had to be laid out a certain way so that my day could flow a certain way. So like I had no space for any flexibility in my life. And also my sleep was shit. Like, I would probably only sleep through the night maybe 3 times a week, and that's because I was so exhausted from all the broken sleep I had before. I would fall asleep at a decent hour, and then I'd be up at 4 in the morning till about 5, till about 6. I'd go to sleep for an hour, and then I'd power through my day. So my sleep was shitty, my digestion was terrible. Again, I just didn't have any joy in my life, and it was like I just normalized all this. I thought this is just what it takes to be productive. This is just what it looks like. You know what I mean? Like this is just how you have to live life to be successful. And it was exhausting and it was isolating and it felt lonely. And again, I was just like, is this it? And, you know, it got to this point of feeling so debilitated that I knew something needed to give, but I didn't know what. So for me, how this whole journey kind of started to unfold of knowing that I needed to do something different was I actually started more on the spiritual side of things. And because the biggest hiccup for me was like why my relationships were so hard or like surface level or just like, again, attracting not good men. Like I used to always say I would I was so heavily in my masculine at that time that I would go on dates and I would be competing with the men at the table without even realizing. I also worked in a male-dominated industry, so I was surrounded by that industry by that energy all day, but, like, I felt like I was in a dick swinging contest all day, every day, and I was winning most of those contests, unfortunately, okay? Like, it was not something I wanted to be doing, but I was just so out of balance energetically in my life. And so when I started to realize that, like, Minty, something's gotta give, you need some support, you need some help, I actually started more on the spiritual aspect of just trying to figure out what was going on with my relationships and why that was so hard for me to piece together when even though I was burnt out at work, I was still making a good go of it. Like I was seeing return on it in some way, shape, or form, but in my relationships, I couldn't. And so I started kind of going down that path and I got into energy healing and energy readings and meditation and sound baths. And these were all great things. They really helped me and nurtured me at the time when I needed it. But where I found that it came short was I would feel great meditating for an hour, but as soon as I got up out of that meditation, I'd be right back to high strung min too. You know what I mean? So it's like I couldn't translate what was happening on that meditation pad into my everyday life. It was just two completely different realities for me. And so when I realized I couldn't really bridge that gap, I started to look into more of the scientific side of things, okay? Psychology, the nervous system, et cetera, et cetera. And I realized that in order for me to bridge that gap of feeling more calm, feeling inner peace, being able to laugh again, I needed to figure out how to bring that into my everyday life. Okay. And that meant working with my body, working with my mental, working with my emotional, and working with my physical state. And this is where I started to understand the nervous system and what that meant and how we process stress and how we hold stress in our body and how we let go of it. And it was through years, if I'm being honest, of learning that and testing that and practicing and trying things. It took me honestly probably about 2 to 3 years to really get myself out of burnout. But it worked and I did it. And now that's what I help people do. I took all those years of what I learned and I've condensed it into 3 months of practical application to help people get out of the state that I was in. But here's the thing that I consider myself a learner, a lifelong learner, and a knowledge intaker. And once you give me a concept, I can dissect it pretty well. But when it comes to application and identifying your own blind spots, that's a different thing. And that's why it took me a few years to get myself out of burnout, and now I can get people out of it in 90 days or less. Is because when you're trying to figure out your own blind spots, it's not that you can't, it just comes with a lot more trial and error and bumping your head, and that's what I had to do for years. But, it was less about doing more and more about unlearning a lot of the things I thought it took to be successful and letting go of control and surrendering to the process a little bit, not a little bit, a lot of it, and just getting to a point where it's like, I know this isn't working anymore and I don't know what the next step is, but I know it needs to be something different, you know? And again, one of the big wake up calls for me at work was I got to a point where I was coming to work and I was gossiping so much. Like, just talking shit for no reason. And none of it was usually ever like super malicious, but I would, yeah, I would just gossip a lot. This person didn't do that. That person did this person didn't do that. And maybe it's the nature of the industry a little bit, but I chose to partake in it. And I remember one day coming to work and I had just gone through um kind of a sticky couple of weeks with my direct business partner there, and I was so not proud of how I handled it because before I went to him with what my issues were, I just gossiped about it to everybody else. And I remember by the time I finally talked to him about it, one of the first things he said was, "Why didn't you just tell me? Like, why didn't you come to me? Why didn't you tell me?" And I felt so stupid, which shame and judgment doesn't help, okay? But I'm just telling you how I felt at the time. I felt so dumb that I had stooped to the level of gossiping. But in hindsight, what I know now is when we're dysregulated, we're not gossiping because we're bad people or we're mean. We're gossiping because we're looking for some form of connection, and that's the only way we know how to get it in that moment. And so I remember I got to this point where I'm like, Mintu, you spend your days gossiping, you're exhausted, like take control of your life back. Do something about it. You don't have to live this way. You're suffering. You're putting yourself through voluntary suffering every single day, and no one's coming to save you. That's one thing I've always believed in. No one's coming to save you. The only person that can change this is you. And so again, thankfully, I went down that path of spirituality and then to more practical nervous system stuff. And one thing I will mention, whether this is a side note or not, is like if any of you have ever gone more kind of the woo-woo route or the spiritual route, in that world, it can be very easy to kind of bypass your experience and bypass your truth and your emotions, which means like like spiritual bypassing is almost like, one of the things they talk about is look for the good in everything, right? Which isn't a bad thing. That's I think a healthy skill to have, but not to the point where you're overriding poor behavior or the reality of something. And so I know I would say stuff like when it came to relationships where it's like, well, this person's not treating you good. He's, flaky or whatever, but it's because he grew up this way and this, that, and the third. And so you can make an excuse as to why he behaves that way. Or even at work, it's like, yeah, you have to work long hours and you're not taking care of yourself while you're there, but you make good money. You know what I mean? Like you're constantly bypassing the reality of things. And when I went the spiritual route, that was another disconnect for me because I was doing a lot of that. Where when I came back to understand more of the nervous system side of things and the physiological side of things, it helped me piece together that it's like, okay, so all of that can be true, but how are you changing your behavior? How are you going to be living different so that this doesn't keep leaking and sucking the energy out of you like it has been, right? So by the time I got myself out of burnout, I was able to see things a lot clearer with my career. And that's when I realized it was time to move on. And what I'm really grateful for is that I didn't pull the plug while I was burnt out, because this is a conversation I have a lot with people where, they're feeling like their back's up against the wall and they got to switch careers or leave the company or move countries or whatever the case is. They just want to run as far away as possible from the situation they're in because they feel so helpless. And when we do that, we're not seeing big picture. We're not seeing clearly. And so I always say that you don't want to make decisions from the valley. You want to do it from the mountaintop. And so I'm glad that I at least had the awareness to not pull the plug in the valley and get myself back up to stable ground and the mountaintop, if you will, and leave on a note where I felt very grounded and powerful, empowered in my decision. So once I was feeling good again and regulated again, and I could really see big picture that just this career wasn't in alignment for what I wanted for the next chapter of life for me, I decided to hand in my resignation, which was hard. I'd been there for 8 years at this point uh, when I had made the decision, and I gave it a year before I told them. Um, and, I spent more time with these people than I did with my own family. I was so wrapped up in my identity and my career and, working for Mercedes-Benz and yeah, there was a lot that came with it. So I decided January 1st, 2022 that I wanted to leave. And then I gave them my notice in January of 2023. And the reason I took that year was because I wanted to be really sound in my decision. I wanted to let them know when I was on the mountaintop, not from the valley. And I wanted to set myself up financially because one of the promises I made myself was I didn't want to go back to something purely because of money. I had golden handcuffs on. For sure I did. Like the reason I was there that long was because of the money and the people, they were great too. But um, I had no plan when I was leaving. Like even when I decided I was going to give them my notice, I had no idea I was going to like higher alignment wasn't a thing yet. I didn't know what I was going to do. I just knew that I was done in the car industry. And so I had to make sure I made myself a promise to not just fall back into that position or into that role just because it was easy and it would pay me and then tell myself something like, oh, well, you'll figure it out as you do it. I knew that I kind of needed to give myself a blank slate and zero options to think clearly about what the next move was. So that's why I gave myself a year. And again, that ended up being the best year because I made the most money I'd ever made in my career there. I got to just enjoy myself and have fun. I got to really, because I knew what my plan was, I really poured into the relationships I had that time and just kind of like savored them for what they were. And then by the time I gave them my notice, the decision was made clear. And, just as the universe does, I was tested. I was, had many conversations. Are you sure you want to leave? What if we give you this? All these things. But I knew in my heart of hearts that it was time to leave. And so I did. And then 4 weeks later, after my last day, I took off to Bali for 2 months. And I spent 2 months in Bali and Thailand doing my eat, pray, love thing. I went by myself, and it was strictly a trip to just come back home to me. And, I always talk about how the root cause of burnout is not having too much on your plate. It is, the root cause is disconnect inside. And so while I had got myself out of burnout, I also was still recovering from decades of not taking care of myself properly. And what I mean by that is just bypassing my needs, self-abandoning. All day long, I'd be giving myself to clients and work and colleagues and files and friends and all good things, but I was not pouring back into myself at all. And even when I healed my burnout, that was essentially the process that I had to go through, was learning how to take care of myself again and not self-abandon. There was still decades of that existed before I got to that point. So when I went on my little eat, pray, love trip, it was all about self-connection. So I went by myself. I was in bed every night by 7 o'clock, or at least in the hotel room. Like, I didn't go out and party. I don't drink, and I'm also not a partier, but I didn't go out at all at night. I just thankfully got a VPN blocker and watched movies from my hotel room. And then I'd get up early and I'd go, out to the beach, or I'd go explore. I just spent my days exploring and journaling and finding myself again and who I was. And then I came home and another test came. And the test was, I had just had this beautiful experience of being abroad for 2 months. And now I was back in my old environment. And it was like, what do I do now? Right? Because it's easy to kind of surrender and do your own thing when you're on the other side of the world and your friends and family are in a completely different time zone. And you're kind of like not only just choosing to be on your own, but you're kind of forced to be on your own just due to proximity and, again, time zones and things like that. But now I'm back in my environment. I'm back in Edmonton. All my friends are working. All my family's working. During the day, I have no one to hang out with and no one to talk to. And then those old voices start to creep back in of, do you want your old job back? Do you want to find another job? And that was tempting. Are you wasting time by not working? You're just eating away at your savings. All these noises started to come up. And for me, that was testing. I had to really anchor in to know, what did you promise yourself? You promised yourself you wouldn't go back strictly because of money. You promised yourself that you were going to build a life and a career now based on alignment beyond money. Don't get me wrong, I like a fat paycheck, of course, who doesn't? But working strictly because of that was not enough, and something I didn't want my life to be governed by. And so I just had to cocoon and hunker in a little bit and not get stuck in that noise.
Okay, if you're an executive who's craving more clarity, happiness, and a sense of real inner peace in your day-to-day, make sure you hit follow so you never miss an episode. This show is here to help you lead, succeed, and actually feel good while doing it. And if something resonates today, give it a like and share it with someone else who could use a little bit more calm in their life too.
And then what happened was, one day a friend of mine was talking and he's like, what are you going to do next? And I was like, I don't know. And he's like, you should go into the coaching space. He's like, you should coach salespeople and upper management. And the reason he had suggested that was because when I was still at Mercedes, we would do sales training with the staff every couple of weeks. And my trainings had slowly evolved from finance training into let's breathe, let's meditate, let's close our eyes for a bit. I would do that, but all my meetings were starting with more restorative regulation practices. And he knew I was doing that. And so he was like, why don't you start doing that? And I was like, good idea. So a week later, Higher Alignment Consulting Incorporated was formed, and the rest is kind of history from there. I started figuring it out. I hired my own coach to build the business, and now we're almost 2 years into it, and I have helped numerous executives, business owners, high-performing sales professionals to reclaim their life, to be able to feel happy again, to be able to feel more rested and calm and present with their wives, their husbands, their kids, their friends, to be able to vacation without worrying about what's happening at work, to kick alcohol, to kick anti-anxiety meds, to kick caffeine, to heal their IBS, to come into major promotions and the biggest contracts they've ever earned, to um, getting married and just, again, reclaiming their life, letting them feel like they're human again, reconnecting them with what's most important, and empowering them to design their success how they see fit. No one's got to give up their ambition. No one's got to give up their paycheck. No one's got to give up any of that. But they don't have to lose themselves in the process, right? And that's what I had learned for myself, and what I'm so passionate about teaching people now is you can still have all the things, but you don't have to sacrifice you in the process. But if I'm being honest, that's going to take rewiring. That's going to take being really raw and honest with yourself. That's going to take learning to express emotion that you haven't before, and be real and speak your truth and use your voice and say no. It's going to take all of these things. But on the other side of that, on the other side of the discomfort of becoming this new person, is a more grounded and free version of you. And I've seen it time and time again. Every client I work with, every person I get to talk to, where I get to share this story and share this information with them and see a little bit of life come back into them, it works. And it's possible, and you can do it, but sometimes you need a little help, right? Sometimes you need someone to point out your blind spots. I did it with some help, and I did a lot of it myself, but it also took me a lot longer than it's taking my clients, for instance, you know? But I've referenced this so many times in the last couple of weeks because it just hit me so hard. You know, I heard Tony Robbins say on an interview recently, pain is pain is inevitable, suffering is a choice. And my goal in life is to help people suffer less, and this is the way I'm doing it right now. It doesn't need to be so hard. It doesn't need to feel so exhausting. You don't need to wake up every single day and say, "Is this it?" You can wake up and be like, "Wow, I'm so glad I'm waking up today. I actually feel genuine gratitude. I'm not faking it just because everyone tells me I should." You know, I can genuinely connect with people. I can create space for the right people to be in my life. I can give from a space of genuinely feeling like I have the capacity and I'm not relying strictly on guilt and capability, right? Like, you don't have to always be giving out. You can be receiving. But when we haven't learned that through our childhood, it's hard to now all of a sudden do that as an adult. You know, and that's why I wanted to share my childhood and story a bit with you guys today, is because my parents came over here in survival mode because they literally were surviving, right? They were escaping a communist country. They had a 2-year-old son. They didn't know the language. They didn't have any money. They had to literally build a life here from the ground up, which, by the way, they raised 3 beautiful, healthy kids who are who all have families and healthy spouses and are wonderful people. Okay. My parents came here to survive, and so they had to live in survival mode. And so no wonder we all absorbed a bit of that energy, and I'm grateful I did. But for my life now, and for most of you listening to this, you don't have to survive anymore. You're beyond survival. And what I mean is, you got a home, you have a job, you have electricity, you have running water, you have access to food. That's survival. Anything beyond that, the big office, the cars, the vacations, any of that, that's not survival. That's thriving. Happiness, peace, those aren't part of survival. That's like a bonus thing, which is crazy to say. Happiness is a luxury, okay? But we don't need to keep living from survival mode. We don't need to keep doing that anymore. We are safe. If you have those things I mentioned, you have access to food, you got a roof over your head, you got clothes, you can pay your basic bills, you're out of survival mode. So now anything above that is a conscious choice. It's a conscious rewiring. And that's what I had to learn for myself. I had all the above and beyond things that we could have wanted that we think bring us happiness, and I still didn't feel it. So I always refer to like the tuning fork example or the radio frequency example, where it's like, if the life that you want is on 91.7 radio station, you're going to have to change your station till you are at 91.7 so you can hear what's playing on there. But if you're at 82 or 79 or 100.1, you're not going to pick up what 91.7 is saying. So if you don't like what your world looks like right now, if you don't like the fights you're having with your spouse, if you don't like the work environment you're at, if you don't like the type of people you're attracting, you got to change the inner frequency first. Okay, you got to change your inner radio station to match what it is that you want, right? And I get it, it's not easy. We all have blind spots, but what I'm telling you, it's possible. Like, I always say I was the queen of lying to myself. Like, if you would have asked me 5 years ago if I was confident, I would say yes. And if you would have asked me, do you love yourself? I would have said yes. But all that I've uncovered in the last few years is that I didn't. It was all a mask. I didn't feel safe to be who I truly was. I was constantly performing. I was constantly on, and it was all coming from a good place. But it was because I was insecure about who I was. I didn't feel worthy. I didn't feel good enough. And so I overcompensated by being this high achiever. And now with all the work I've done, it's like I know my worth. And that doesn't mean I put out shit work now all of a sudden. It's not like once you realize your worth, you're like, oh, I don't have to try anymore. I still try. I still want to put out great product. I still want to show up for people and serve them to the best of my ability. But I know that if I have an off day, everything isn't going to fall apart. I know that if I say no to something, that I still will have friends and family and colleagues. I know that if I miss a deadline, that I can ask for grace. I know that if I need a break, I can take it. I know that if I need to say no to an outing, I can do it. And nothing about me changes. I still am who I am. But I don't self-abandon anymore. And your life will change when you start to do that. Your relationships will get better. Your bank account will get bigger. Your work will become more meaningful. So, where I'm at today is, again, I've been running higher alignment for 2 years now. I have worked with some incredible, incredible business owners and leaders, people who are like way smarter than I am, and have helped them get so much of their life back. And in the process, my life has only gotten better too. I, within the 2 years, I met my partner, Thomas, a little over a year ago. We're now engaged today. We're living together. We're planning a wedding. And 5 years ago, I had this polished life from the inside out, and I didn't love myself and was attracting shit partners. Like, when you prioritize yourself first and foremost, life changes. And it might not be a muscle that you're used to flexing, so you might need some help. And shameless plug, if you're an executive or a high performer who's ready to gain control of their life back, hit me up. The link will be in the show notes. But there's just so much more to life. And if you would have told me 5 years ago I'd be where I'm at today, I'd probably find it hard to believe. But it didn't take rocket science. It just took coming back home to myself. So that's my story in a nutshell. I hope it let you guys into my world a little bit more. And one thing I will add, maybe I'll end on this, is that like, even though I do this work, I'm still human. I still have dysregulated days. I had like a mini panic attack yesterday. Like, it lasted 10 minutes, but like I still have moments of insecurity and being snappy and not great sleep. Like, I still have those moments, but I used to live that way constantly. Like, that was my day-to-day life. Now that maybe happens once a month, once every couple of months. And that's the whole point of this work, is it's not to eliminate stress completely from your life. That's impossible. We're human and the world we live in is dysregulated. But it's to minimize the effect it has on your day-to-day. Maybe something that used to bother you for a week or 2 weeks now only bothers you for an hour, half an hour, and you can come back to yourself a lot quicker. That's the whole point of this work. I still have hard things to do, and my life's going in a new direction. I'm gonna be a wife. I hope to be a mother soon. You know what I mean? I'm planning a wedding. Like, what hasn't been something I've had to put energy into in my life before is now a new chapter for me. And so that's gonna call a new version of Mintu out. And it's something I've prayed for so long, but regardless, my nervous system's going to be tested and stretched because it's new. And so the same rules and things that I had to learn before apply, but it's in a new arena, you know? So, as a former single boss babe businesswoman who had it put together all on the outside just to feel empty inside, to now being a more grounded fiance who is living out in the country, who has a big ass dog. I've never had a pet in my life. I got a big 120-pound Great Pyrenees now. My life's covered in dog hair. Um, I camp. I go skiing. I know this sounds ridiculous, but these are things that the old version of Mintu never did. To be at this point now, for me, is just a sign of where my nervous system is. I feel safe. I feel at peace. I feel at home. And I'm still ambitious in building a business that I'm really passionate about and love to do. And so, again, I'm human. I have my moments. But it's amazing what life will give you when you learn to just come back to yourself. And that's the point of all this. So, I hope that helped. I hope that let you guys into my world a little bit. And if any of you ever want to talk about this, hit me up, Instagram, LinkedIn. I'm reachable on both. I love to have dialogue about this. And if anything, I just hope that this connects us a little bit more. And I hope you take this as a sign that wherever you're at right now, higher alignment is always possible for you.